Hey everyone, Justin here on the Hangfire Podcast. Welcome to the second installment of the Overlooked album series. So far, we've been looking at albums that most people overlook in the Stones catalog. Well, here's a few more albums you should definitely put on your radar. Up first is from 1967, Between the Buttons. I have to be careful not to go overboard with this album right now because I intend to make a longer video about this album at a later point, so hopefully I'll keep it short. In a nutshell, Between the Buttons is the Stones' most un-Stones album ever. Easily their most British sounding album. They have never sounded more English than they do here on Between the Buttons, and frankly that's one of the album's charms. I think it's super easy to miss this album because it comes before the classic Jimmy Miller run of classic albums like Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile, Goat's Head. I mean, these are what people know as the classic albums from the Stones. With that said, I have to admit, I also fell into the trap of overlooking Between the Buttons, but mainly because this album sounds nothing like the Rolling Stones, which for the longest time was my reason to stay away from it, but now is the reason why I embrace it. It's an absolutely fascinating listen because they're trying new things, they're experimenting, they're keeping up with what's going on in music. If you live in the more blues, rock, country space with the Stones, this album will throw you for a loop. Here the band is making a space for themselves in that classic 60s sound, and fans of that 60s sound will know what I'm talking about. Call it what you want, 60s pop, Baroque, experimental, psychedelic, art pop. That's where the Stones are fitting in on this album, and it's, like I say, absolutely fascinating to listen to. I've spoken many times on one of the Stones' great strengths, which is their ability to adapt and to metamorphosize from album to album or song to song or genre to genre. They're constantly borrowing and reshaping sounds around them and repurposing them for their needs, and that's what makes the Stones so unique. On this album, you can definitely hear shades of Bob Dylan or the Kinks. It's super clear where they want to see the music sit. You should be made aware that there's technically two versions of this album. The US version of Between the Buttons has the two major singles on the album, Let's Spend the Night Together and Ruby Tuesday, two of their biggest songs ever. While the UK version does not have those two singles, and also there are a couple songs that are not on the US version that are on the UK version, like the song Backstreet Girl. Nevertheless, I think you'll be able to still appreciate the album's strengths even despite whatever version you listen to. So, songs like Yesterday's Papers, My Obsession, Backstreet Girl, these are really pretty songs, really good stuff. And super cool to note that My Obsession is Brian Wilson's favorite Rolling Stones song.
Specifically, one of the things in that album that blew me away the most was a song called My Obsession. And I was invited down to the Rolling Stones studio the night they mixed down My Obsession. And I'm almost passed out with it. So I could not believe that record. It was the most unbelievably groove of a record I've ever heard in my life. But we were all experimenting with different kinds of sounds. The Stones were really kicking butt with My Obsession.
Anyone who's a fan of Brian Wilson will be able to pick up why that particular song is so special to him. It's such a earworm of a track. There's a hook that is something you can tell Brian would be attracted to. It reminds me a little bit of the riff in Shortening Bread, which is a very obscure Beach Boys song, but it's that same kind of earworm, that ear candy that Brian likes that he can't get out. And so I'm not surprised he would like My Obsession. But anyway, it's a cool little connection between the two bands. Anyway, like I said, Between the Buttons is their most unstonesiest album, and that's enough reason to go check it out. Next up, from 1974, It's Only Rock and Roll. We couldn't get more further away than the sound on Between the Buttons to hear on It's Only Rock and Roll, but this is probably more familiar territory to Stones fans. This album was always dismissed by fans, and while I can kind of see why, this is an album that I play often, actually. Admittedly, the mix on this is not great. It's a little bit on the boxy, dull side, and I suspect that this accounts for most people's dismissal of this album without even realizing that that's probably their biggest issue with it. The sound is not fantastic. It doesn't jump out of the speakers as well as other albums. But I hope most people will listen past that because I think that this album still has some strong moments, some very Stonesy strong moments. Okay, some of the highlights. Really, the first track kicks things off in a great way. If You Can't Rock Me is one of Jagger's best performances as a vocalist. He's supplying some kick-ass vocals and great play here with Charlie Watts because his performance is also a shining moment. They both come through very, very strong. Textbook album track, obscure track. Most people don't know it. I mean, I think this song would have been as big as a Brown Sugar. I mean, I think it's a great rocker. Like I say, I think a lot of these songs are held hostage by the very lukewarm, weak mix. And so I think had it been mixed in a different way, I think some of these songs would have definitely shined through a bit more. And then the song itself, It's Only Rock and Roll, which is an absolute classic, one of the Stones' biggest songs ever. There's a great story on that song. The basic tracks of the song is basically the demo that Mick and Ronnie recorded at Ronnie's house very late one night. That's actually Kenny Jones on drums and the fantastic Willie Weeks on bass. The story goes, Mick took the demo back to the Stones where they attempted to re-record the track. They realized that they couldn't match the vibe on the demo, and so they decided to continue working off the original recording. They kept the original drum and bass tracks, but wiped clean the guitars, plus the backing vocals, which also contained another famous friend who was there at that session that night, David Bowie. Bowie helped out on backing vocals on the original demo, but his contributions were not kept on the final recording. Keith then officially added a couple guitar parts, and voila, the song was complete. The song itself is a classic, but so is the music video. You gotta check out the promo video for It's Only Rock and Roll, directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. It's a super fun watch. Time Waits for No One. This is another Mick Taylor scene stealer. Pretty good lyrics from Mick Jagger, but also Mick Taylor just steals the show completely with that fantastic solo. Not only did he provide some great guitar licks on this song, he also provided part of the song itself. Apparently he did not get the proper songwriting credit on this song, which was not surprising. Another classic on this album is Fingerprint File, which for my money is worth the price of admission alone. This is another one of the Stones' most funkiest songs, and it's a great cast here. It's Mick Jagger on that prominent rhythm guitar part. That's Mick Taylor on bass. And it showcases the band in a great way. It's a very cinematic song, really. It's a great performance by Mick, especially that spoken outro at the end is very captivating and very dramatic in a fun, tongue-in-cheek way. Another personal favorite for me that most people would probably dismiss is Dance Little Sister. There is just something so irresistible about this. It is a classic Stones vibe. It's barely anything on paper, but the sound of it is, it just grabs you. It's a perfect little joint effort between Keith on guitar and Charlie on drums. They really lock in on that groove. One of my favorite quotes ever is from Jimmy Page about this song. He's so good at what he does. It's a shame his personal life should be exposed, that it should be allowed to interrupt what he's doing musically, because he's the facade of what the Stones are doing. People get more into the outrage than the music sometimes, which is a great pity. You only have to put on Dance Little Sister, and you forgive the guy for anything. I've always loved that quote, and the fact that Jimmy heard something in Dance Little Sister says everything you need to know about the track. Keith's rhythm playing on that track is fantastic. It's all about playing with the rhythm. He's in front, behind the beat. He's really pushing and pulling, and it's just a great one to dance to. That's what the song's all about, so it's not one to think too much about. Have fun with it. So the album, It's Only Rock and Roll. Super fun, very light on its feet. Probably not the best presentation in sound, but if you look past that, you'll find that the album does in fact pack a punch. And finally today, we have 1980's Emotional Rescue. To me, this album was always like a little brother to Some Girls. I mean, obviously it came right after Some Girls, but in many ways they share some traits. Sure, Emotional Rescue kind of falls short of the greatness of Some Girls, but is that enough to dismiss this album? Absolutely not. I mentioned in the previous Overlooked album video that Black and Blue was my favorite sounding Stones album in terms of audio fidelity and sound quality. I think nothing beats Black and Blue. I think coming right underneath that is this album, Emotional Rescue. There are some immaculate recordings, I think, on this. Specifically the song She's So Cold on this album. It just sounds crisp and clean, and it's so easy to crank that one up and not really get fatigued by it because it's so easy on the ears and just so sweet. And but this album really has some great sounding moments in it. This album was beautifully recorded by Chris Kimsey, who's worked with the Stones on many albums during this era. So many highlights for me on this one. Dance Part 1. I've always felt Dance Part 1 is a little bit like a cousin to Miss You. It's definitely not as catchy as Miss You is, but nevertheless, it's a great dance track and a great fun, lighthearted one to put on. This is a great one that Ronnie really contributed to the band. That's him playing bass on this track. And apparently, Keith wanted to really keep this song pretty much an instrumental. He wanted it to be very basic and a fun dance track. But in the end, Mick won out and eventually wrote lyrics and turned it into a proper song. In fact, there are two versions of this song, Dance Part 1 and Dance Part 2. Part 2 is sort of like a sequel. There are different lyrics. The same essence is there, but it's just more added vocals. Where the Boys All Go is one of the great ones, where Mick kind of puts on this great, very British Cockney kind of accent. And if you notice, he rarely sings in that voice. He's usually singing in kind of an American accent. But on tracks where he sings very English, it's cool and very fun to listen to. And then you got the song She's So Cold, which I mentioned before is recorded beautifully. The guitars sound wonderful. It's a guitar fest, this song. It's got guitars flying left and right on every side of you. And it's just a great listen. It's great performances by the entire band. Mick really delivers a great vocal. And the interplay between Keith and Ronnie, very strong. And holding it down, Charlie and Bill really get the center of the song locked in. And it's just one of the Stones' best band moments. They're just cooking on this track. And it's really just, it just hits the right spot. And then you've got the great title track, Emotional Rescue. I just love this track. And if this song makes you roll your eyes because of the falsetto voice or the disco vibe, well, I roll my eyes back at you because this song is a fun track. Ronnie Wood playing bass on this, delivering one of his funkiest bass lines that I say really is up there with Mick Taylor's bass line on Fingerprint File from It's Only Rock and Roll that we just talked about. Anyway, it's a fun song, and I love it because it really showcases Mick as an actor. He really delivers two different roles in this song, which is fascinating to listen to. He plays the falsetto very well, which he has attributed that sound to Prince and the great R&B singer Don Covey. I've always been a fan of Mick's falsetto. I think he does it very well, and it's rooted in very strong R&B roots. So I think he pulls it off great. And the track is one of their best produced tracks, really. I would put it up there with Miss You as one of their most pristine and calculated productions. It's super easy on the ears. It's wonderfully warm and great to blast. And, you know, cherry on top is that you can dance to this. It's such a great groovy track. So for those who are haters on this song, it's your loss. You're missing out. So the album as a whole may be a little wobbly in one or two spots, but definitely not something that you can just dismiss right off the bat. And don't forget my mantra on this channel. Despite the album as a whole, there's always moments of brilliance in every Rolling Stones album. And this album definitely has those moments. Absolutely a sleeper classic. Well, that's it for today. Have I still not mentioned an album that you're thinking about for this series? Well, let me know in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for watching Hangfire.